All right. Testing, testing. One, two, three. All right. Testing, testing. One, two, all right. Testing, testing. One, two, three. All right. Testing, testing. One, two, three. All right, I think we're good to go. Welcome, wizard, warrior, wanderer, wayfarer, and wildcat alike, wherever you are, whoever you are, and whenever you may be receiving this transmission. I'm your host for the hour, Frater Francis and Sarah States of the OTA, Frank Monday, broadcasting to you from the central kingdom of Celestial Dragon, Twilight Zone Old Peking, out across the airwaves like a bizarre frequency generated by a emerald pyramidion atop some ancient megalithic structure. This evening, paranormal stories. So, if you have a paranormal story or have heard of one from family and friends, call in and let's talk about it. I remind all participants to be mindful and respectful of others. If we do get more than one person chiming in, if not, not to worry. We'll talk about unusual stories of the paranormal. I'd like to remind everyone to check me out on www. I'm Not a Criminal. You can find a link to it down in the description box. And so I welcome you to check it out over there. I've got some essays and articles and other behind the scenes pictures and stuff like that. So check it out if you're interested. Um, Always good fun. Either way, not to worry. Also, if you are participating in the 100-day challenge with the Scholar Warrior, we're on day 76. So I'm working on my 8th virtue, and you might be somewhere along in that as well. We're going to be looking at some ghost stories from the earliest sources of Chinese literature tonight. And there are many, from the painted skin ghost to the girl of the drum and bell tower, and even one that occurred right here in my neighborhood. There was a wandering seamstress that got murdered during the revolution, and she's been wandering around in this neighborhood. Many people have seen her, at least of the older generation, the people that were in their 70s and 80s when I first moved here. I don't know if anyone has seen her recently. Maybe since those old spirits have left, she's departed as well. But the oral tradition of ghost stories in China kind of, they say, developed during the Shang dynasty, like 1600 to around 1200 before the Common Era. So that's like 3,600 years ago. And they say they continue to be popular today in China. So let's look at a few of them. In fact, ghost stories were the earliest form of literature in China. Some of the first things these folks over here started talking about. So there must be something to it, all right? Must be something to it. One of the big things they focus on is the importance of a proper burial. If you don't deal with your dearly beloved, the beloved dead, then you can get Po and Hun hauntings. So they believe that there's a collection of 10 Po spirits and 3 Hun spirits in each person's body. And when the person dies and departs, these spirits, they're hungry and they need to continue to be fed for a while. I believe probably for like the first year, but then periodically after that as well. if a spirit reached the other side and they either get reincarnated or go out to live with the gods in the timeless homeland, um, different from each tradition in China. Buddhists, for example, believe that people were more often reincarnated, while Confucianists believe that the ancestors dwelt with the gods and could be prayed to for assistance and protection. That's similar in Tao. The first step in the journey after death was one's burial, and very important in the funeral service. So those things are still kept taken very seriously even to today, because if it's not done right, the soul of the deceased would return to Earth to haunt their living descendants. And also self-cultivation. If an individual doesn't cultivate their virtues throughout life, then when they die, they will become what's called a hungry ghost. So in China, the ground underneath the earth is considered the property of the gods. And the realms, the celestial vault of heaven, is also considered the realm of the gods. So we have the gods above and the gods below. Cemeteries were located outside of towns and cities and rural areas, and there were earth spirits there known as Tudigong. And so there in other places as well too, there are spirits associated with rivers and streams and cusps of woods, young woods, old woods, hills, and different feng shui formations in the land. One could not just go and dig a grave without first honoring the gods and local spirits and purchasing land from the dead. So they sell these stacks of hell banknotes, and you have to burn those in order to make obsequies to the realm of the dead and the king of hell before you're allowed to dig a grave. So the relatives of this deceased would choose a spot and then write up a legal contract of purchasing that plot from gods and spirits. This contract cited the dead person's name, titles, and date of death. Also, it would entail the exact dimensions of the plot and the price paid for the land, and signatures of witnesses. They placed the document in the grave and then honored it by paying a certain amount of cash. Usually, again, you purchase an equal amount of cash that you can burn in a ritual sacrifice. Since physical currency was of no use in the afterlife, people would purchase sheets of paper cut out with a certain amount of bills from it, written in denominations on them, in what are called, again, hell banknotes. And they have the god of Mu Wong, or the god of the underworld, his picture on them. They're pretty fun. I buy them and burn them for deceased in our family as well. There are lots of different kinds you can buy. So once all this was accomplished and signs were received that it was acceptable, the person could be buried. And there are different environmental phenomena that will occur to see that you have received a response from heaven and earth. It could be the sudden appearance of a rainbow, or a sudden thunderstorm with lightning, the blossoming of a flower before you, or a roaming insect landing on you, the appearance of a sacred animal. Lots of different things can happen that would indicate that your sacrifice was accepted. So, since it was hoped that the dead person's soul would pass over the bridge to the land of the gods, grave goods were included in the burial, which consist of favorite objects and favorite foods. The dead then have to be mourned for an appropriate amount of time. For parents and grandparents, the minimum was 3 years, during which one had to wear special mourning clothing. You can't attend parties, you can't listen to and play music, and in the case of government positions, you couldn't go to work. Government officials had to resign for 3 years when a parent or grandparent died, and failure to report a death to the authorities carried the penalty of exile or hard labor. These rules and many others applied to royalty as well as to the peasant class. And if any of these steps were not done properly or were ignored, the soul of the deceased would return to earth and torment the living descendants by hauntings and other things. So they divided into parts of the soul, right? So there were two parts of the soul, the hun and po. The po is the yin aspect of the soul and is associated with darkness, water, and earth. One scholar, Charles Ben, writes, it was the governor of the physical nature of man and gave form to the fetus in the womb. The po was the animal nature, instincts, and urges that first became apparent after birth, when the behavior of an infant was clearly centered on the fulfillment of its self centered needs. So that's the po portion. I believe the po portion in the yin aspect is 3 in men and 10 yang portion or hun. And then in women, it's the opposite. They have um, the opposite. Or maybe it's 3 and 7. 7 and 10. I'll figure it. Maybe I can find some information on it. I can't remember exactly. The Hun was the yang aspect of the soul and associated with light, fire, and the heavens. Charles Ben goes on to write that in governing the intelligence of man, at birth it was weak, but evolved and strengthened as the children's reason developed, especially after the age of 6 and during the 7th year. When education began, it reached full maturity at the age of 20 or 21, but did not fully perfect itself until the age of 50. These two parts of the soul worked together to make life possible for a person. The Hun, governed by reason, and the Po, by instinct. But the Hun needed the Po in order to survive. After death, the two aspects could return to cause problems for the living if proper burial rites had not been observed, or for other reasons, such as unfinished business, a vow they may have taken, to right or wrong, or sometimes just to pay a visit. Stories of ghosts and hauntings, like in a house where they once lived, haunting relatives, or maybe even appearing to strangers for help, are all example of Po hauntings. The yin spirit is still attached to the earth because proper rituals were not observed to release it. One of the best known stories of this type is about the ghost of a young girl who visits the home of some brothers. The spirit was so irritating that they caught it. And they put it in a bag and they threw it down in a well. The next night it came back carrying the bag and haunted them again. They stuffed it back in the bag, tied a rock to it, and threw it in the river this time. The next night, though, the little girl came back, and this time the brothers put her in a hollowed out log, which they capped on each end, set adrift on the river, and the spirit thanked them for a proper burial and never bothered them again. So it shows that some of these can be have a nature of levity, like they're not really taking it that serious. It's like their dead little sister shows up and they're like, hey, and addition, and she's bothering them, knocking stuff over probably, and um, irritating them while they sleep. So they just capture her probably with a peachwood sword, and then oftentimes Taoists would trap them in a gourd, so like a dried out hollow gourd with a cork. And so keeping spirits in gourds was a really popular Taoist activity. And then they would go places where maybe they wanted to um, create a little mischief, and they would pop open the gourd and let the ghost out, like in someone's house or someone's business or something like that. So good fun, right? Good spirited fun. Hun hauntings were of a different nature. The Hun was not attached to the body. So stories about spiritual possessions or ghosts appearing as though they were still living, ghosts taking revenge on living are examples of Hun hauntings. Since the Hun was the rational part of the person, their personality, it was as thought to be a part of the persons that affected by illness in life and the astral self or the astral vehicle who would appear to others in dreams and after death. The scholar Charles Ben gives some examples of these kinds of stories, citing one where a teacher named Tan fell ill and began to die. In a dream, he saw a figure standing in a robe telling him, I am returning your soul to you, and throwing orange robes at him. The next morning, he recovered from the sickness. The orange robe symbolizes the clothing of the soul and the unique aspect of it, which was the Hun. And so we can see too here that if we interpret this along our tree of life from the Kabbalah, then the orange is representative of the sphere of Hod and the more rational aspect of the mind, right? Whereas the green would be the sphere of Netzach and the feminine side and the aspect of the instinct and the animalistic nature, right? In another story, two friends, Gao and Liu, made a pact that whoever died first would return to tell the other what the afterlife is like. Some months after Liu died, Gao heard a knock at his door. One night, and the voice of his friend requesting he douse his lamps and let him in so they could speak in the dark. As they were talking, Gao was disturbed by the smell of a rotting corpse and found that Liu's Hun spirit had possessed the body of a barbarian who had been dead for 7 days. Wow, wonderful. What a great pact. And what an awesome way to show your friend that there is life after death. I actually made a pact with Fred or Tomas Sund that, and my mother as well, and they both passed away the last couple of years, that if they were able to contact me from the spirit world, that they should absolutely do so, because I am a trained magician and I do dream magic, and I know quite a bit about dreamland and the astral world. And so everyone that's passed from my life has visited me at some point after their death, in either on the astral realm or legitimately in the prime material plane. So I have many paranormal encounters in my life that bring, at least anecdotal validation to the reality of the spirit realm. Another tale, emphasizing the importance of keeping one's word, tells of Marshall Lee, who wanted to marry a young girl but was refused by her mother. Lee had to have her, though, and he vowed he would never marry if he could not marry her. He proved himself so devoted and persistent that the mother let him marry her daughter, and he swore to be a faithful husband forever. After a few years, the girl died, and only 1 year later, Lee arranged to marry someone else. Wow, what a fucking POS, huh? Pardon my French there. Just before his marriage with the new woman, when he was soaking in his bath, the Hun spirit of his wife appeared, reminding him how he had promised that he would never marry anyone else. She sprinkled herbs into his bath and vanished. Lee began to feel soft and weak, and so bloated he could not move. He died in the bathtub, and when he was found, his bones and tendons had dissolved. In addition to the importance of keeping one's word, this tale emphasized how one should always observe a proper period of mourning. Wow, yeah. How long did he wait? It said he waited a year, huh? 1 year later. Yeah, I guess that's not enough time for these ancient Chinese spirits to come back and haunt you if you do something wrong, right? The Po, the feminine spiritual aspects, and excuse me, just a second, guys, and the Huan, the masculine aspects of the spirit. When they return to haunt the living, they're generally known as Gui, which means ghost. So there are different kinds of ghosts, lots of different kinds of ghosts written about in the Chinese Necronomicon. One particular book is the Shanghai Jin, Shanghai Shanghai Chunjin, Shanghai Jin. I think it's called the Book of Mountains and Oceans. And in that book, it describes, I don't remember the exact number, but it's probably like 72 or 81, something like that. Those numbers are both sacred in Chinese magic, but it describes numerous amounts of different various qualities of ghosts and why they will return. And it also teaches incantations and formulas for the Taoist magician to either interact with them, help them in their task, release them from this plane of existence, or to capture them and put them into a kind of slavery and let them do work. That is one of the aspects of ancient Taoist magic was necromancy. Capture a poor spirit or a Hun spirit and make it reveal buried treasure to you. So improper burials are the chief reason for the return of the dead, also seeking revenge and asking for help in righting a wrong they had done to them, or one in which they had suffered or they had caused to someone else. In one story, the mother of a man died, and after all the proper rituals were observed at her burial, she returned to haunt him anyway. In this case, grave robbers had broken into her tomb and defiled her body, and she needed her son to apprehend and punish them. After he did as she asked, She was not seen again. I'm kind of in a situation like that now. Like my mom had passed away, and people didn't give her the proper burial or the proper respects, but it was taken out of my hands because my older sister requested to take it upon herself, which it wasn't her duty, it was my duty. I was the only living son. But they fought me in court, and they ended up bringing that misfortune onto themselves. They should have let me handle it because I'm the only one in the family that's actually trained in this type of spiritual science. But they didn't give no kinds of fucks about that. So um, hopefully, Mama does come back and haunt them and cause them a little bit of vexation. A particularly dangerous ghost is a water ghost called a shui gui. And now this spirit is of someone who drowned and whose body was never recovered or honored with a proper funeral or burial. Shuigui haunted the waters where they die and lure people in to drown them. After their victims are dead, the Shuigui could move on, but the victim's spirit took its place and waited for the next person who would be caught off guard. Talismans and amulets were worn to protect people from a Shuigui when going near water or swimming. Also, there have been many famous locations where, like for missing 411 with David Paulides, people will disappear or die near water or granite for some reason. And this could be a perfect example of the Shuigui. They also have these in the Japanese culture. A funny thing about these Shuigui is they have to actually carry water on their head whenever they're outside of the water. And so, if you know how to trick them and make the water fall off their head, then they will be released, and then they have no power. So watch out for the Shuiguis, guys. Good fun. The Jiangshi was a kind of zombie. So Jiangshi means stiff body, and they steal the breath from a person. The scholar Charles Ben wrote that the Chinese believe that the breath or qi is the vital energy on which life depends, and these spirits seek to steal that away from you. A Jiangshi would continue to pursue a person until their breath was taken, but because the spirit was already in the land of the dead, it could not return to life. And because it continued stealing breath of life from others, it could not move very well. Thus, Jiangshis are known as hopping ghosts because their spirit bodies are so stiff they seem to hop instead of walk. I think sometimes when people see shadow people, this is what they're seeing. They're seeing a kind of Jiangshi, um, and their inability to get chi or life breath from someone. I mean, they can get it from animals, and they can get it from people and stuff like that. But then they'll gain more power, and their ghostly body will limber up a bit. These are predatory ghosts, so they could be considered evil, and they're often warded off by charms and spells. So keep an eye out for the Jiangshi, guys. These are the only two malevolent spirits that we've come across so far: the Jiangshi and the Shuigui. Um, we haven't gotten into various forms of Uruguay yet, and I may go ahead and save that for another time. Things are getting busy here around the house, and I thought I would just chime in and say hello to everyone. Hope you guys are all doing well out in Happy Land. This has been Paranormal Encounters, broadcasting to you live from the Central Kingdom of the Celestial Dragon. Frank Monday, signing off in Twilight Zone, Old Peking. Until next time, aspirant ad astra per aspera.